Awesome. Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're incredibly excited to have you all here for our session on Business Central expense management from receipt to reimbursement. And we'll probably give everyone just another moment here to start logging in. Then we'll go ahead and get started. And Gino, when you think we're ready and the moment's long enough, we can flip over to the agenda slide
I
and get
am
going.
I am ready. Let's get started.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and do it. So just taking a quick look at what we'll be covering today as far as an agenda. We'll start with just some very brief introductions of who's actually on the call today. Then we'll go ahead and talk about the new expense management model and agent, walk through some of the key functionality, and then Gino will be taking us into Business Central for a live walkthrough of actually submitting an expense. So from there, we'll wrap things up with a quick look at licensing and then leave some time at the end for questions. You should see a Q&A box available throughout the presentation. So feel free to drop questions in there as they come up, and we'll work through those at the end. So for those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Josh Bolby, Director of Business Development over here at Bond Consulting Services. I'm very excited to be on this webinar with y'all today. And joining me today is Gino Pack. He's our Principal Business Central Consultant. He's actually going to do the majority of the heavy lifting today and actually be taking you through the functionality and demonstration. So with that, that's enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Gino, and he'll go ahead and get us right into it.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for letting me host another BCS webinar on the Business Central Expense Management and Expense Agent. I am super excited to talk to you about this today. This is a new module and new agent that Microsoft has in preview right now that was released with their most recent version of Business Central. So if you're on 2026 Wave 1 of Business Central, this module is available to you in a preview capacity. So I'm super excited to show it to you. There's a lot of intricacies to it, so we're going to be going in and out of Business Central a little bit. I'll be explaining some concepts to you, but if as an organization you have an expense management solution already, a lot of this will be very familiar to you from a conceptual perspective, but if you're looking into putting in a expense management module, or if you're looking to change, now you'll be able to see what Business Central has to offer out of the box, so which is pretty cool. I like my webinars to be collaborative, so please, as Josh mentioned, put your questions in that Q&A box. Josh, feel free to interrupt me, and if a question pops up that you feels like, okay, Gino's in the zone in this area, let's get this question answered, please feel free to nudge me on that.
Yeah, we'll do.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about really two concepts here: Microsoft's new expense management module and Microsoft's new expense agent within Business Central. Because in reality, you couldn't have the agent without the module. So Microsoft built an entire new module within Business Central called expense management, and it's got everything in it that you would expect out of an expense management module. So you can create expense reports, you can release them, you can post them, you can itemize receipts and expenses. You can calculate per diem, you can calculate mileage. There is rule validation and approval workflows built into it. So you can use, if you elect to not use the agent, you can use out of the box Business Central approval workflows and rule validation to handle the manual expenses. And it comes with all of your primary setups that you would expect out of the expense management solution. So like categories, rules, posting groups, locations, and it's all built upon that, the employees and the employee ledger within Business Central. Now, we're moving into a new realm of having all of these agentic capabilities within the system. And with Business Central's expense agent, you just get a whole lot more. It goes from manually managing your expenses to automating your expense management. So you really just have to approve, post, and reimburse your employees. So with the expense agent, if you take advantage of that as well, you get everything in the expense management module plus a web, an upcoming mobile app, an email submission with AI-driven data extraction, categorization, and rule application, expense report line creation, itemization, participation, and receipt attachments. So all of those main data points that you would normally have to manually enter on an expense, the expense agent fills out as much as it can for you, and all you really have to do is validate and send for approval. It's pretty cool. So we're going to go through a lot of that today, and I'm super excited to show it to you. So as mentioned, a lot, I kind of hinted at it in the previous slide. I got a little ahead of myself. Is you get so much more when you use the new module plus the agent together. Okay, you get end-to-end automation, you get AI-driven intelligence, which means it's doing your detection, it's doing your identification, it's doing your categorization, it's doing a lot of that for you, so you don't have to do the manual effort of filling out your expense report. It integrates with the Microsoft Stack, as I mentioned, in previous webinars or anytime I talk about Business Central, is that when you're buying Business Central, you're not getting an ERP system, you're getting a platform. So everything that Microsoft is putting into it, you're really taking advantage of the entire Microsoft cloud stack. So with the expense agent, you can take advantage of utilizing it and submitting expenses across, their web app, across Outlook, across Copilot chat, and then Business Central handles all of the posting and the ledger behind it. So in reality, this is a perfect example of a module where you're taking advantage of the entire Microsoft stack as a platform instead of just an ERP system. And then finally, approval workflows. So you have interim and final approvals, policy validation, and reminders. So it handles the approval workflows based on the parameters you set up within Business Central. Let's dive in and talk about some of the main concepts of expense management. Once again, some of you may know a lot of this information from you utilizing another expense management application that may integrate into Business Central, or using one that's just completely outside of your current, ERP system. But these are good concepts to know, because as I'm going through the system, you'll be able to see what I'm doing. So expenses, obviously, that we all know what expenses are. They're work-related costs, meals, mileage, hotel, car rental, etc. Expense reports is what groups all your expenses into a single document for submission and approval. Expense categories and rules. Categories classify your expenses by type, and the rules apply your company guidelines to keep your expenses within policy. You'll see that as we go through the setups, that there are some policies that you can set up on expenses, so that way users can stick within the guidelines of your company that your company has put out. Refundable versus reimbursable expenses. This is a concept, to be honest with you, that I needed to reread the documentation on a couple of times to understand it, and I think I got it now. But refundable means that it's an expense that complies with company policy and is eligible for processing. So you can have non-refundable expenses, so expenses that fall outside of the policies, and the company is not going to take liability of them on their GL, for instance. You're either going to challenge it with your credit card company, or you're going to bill those expenses back to the employee. You're going to claw back those expenses from the employee. So there are a couple of different, it takes a little bit to understand, but it makes sense after you see it in action. And then reimbursable, those are expenses that the employee paid out of their own pocket, and the organization owes them money, so you have to pay them back for it. And all that can be done through the employee ledger within Business Central. And then it also calculates per diem and mileage. So you can even configure the per diem and mileage to be set up for rate, how per diem gets calculated, and any partial day rules that go into calculating per diem as well. So with that, we're gonna not PowerPoint everyone. We are going to go ahead and jump into Business Central here and create a new agent. You can go ahead and hit the plus button, create your own agent, or utilize one of the agents that are out of the box within Business Central. Or I've pre-configured the expense agent already, but I can click on the expense agent and let's go ahead and take a look at how it gets configured. So any agent within Business Central that comes out of the box comes with its own configuration walkthrough. Makes it super easy for you to be able to configure any agent within the system. Let's start with the expense agent. Okay, so first is access and submission. So how are you going to submit receipts, and who are your expense users, and who is your default approver? Okay, we'll dive into this a little bit later, but you can set up you can import employees from your Microsoft 365 environment, or you can import all of your employees from the default employee table within Business Central. Okay, and from there you can set up your approvers. Okay, or if you're a small organization that really only has one approval hierarchy, you can set a default approver, and this approver gets all expense reports. So if you're a much smaller organization that has maybe 10 employees submitting expenses, or if it's one sales manager and you got 10 salespeople underneath you and you only really need one approver, you can set up one approver, and then you don't have to dive deeper into multi-level approvals. You can connect an email account to your Business Central environment, so the agent can look for receipts that may be that have been emailed to this account, and then process the expense and associate it with the specific user. We'll show that off here a little bit. There are default settings that you can apply to the expense agent out of the box. My recommendation is, in a sandbox, to start with the default configurations that come from Microsoft. They give you a lot of good information. So things like the default number series, you don't have to go in and create you don't have to go in and create your own number series. Microsoft has created one for you. Your payment methods, determining what type of reimbursement it is, or what type of payment method was used in the expense. Default expense locations, where are you accepting expenses from? This is where you go and you configure multi-currency, because Business Central, you can harness Business Central's multi-currency capability to receive receipts in multiple different currencies, and then have the conversion done on the expense management side when it posts to the GL. And then management rules. So what are the rules behind your organization driving your expenses? What are the boundaries and guidelines that you're going to put around your employees to ensure that the expenses are submitted accurately? And then categories. These are all the default categories that come with Business Central out of the box. So what are your, and it has pretty much everything that you can think of for an organization. So airline, car, courier, entertainment, gifts, meals, etc. Everything is here. You can even have subcategories. So if I go to meals, for instance, there's alcohol, food, soft drinks, tips, and you can even set rules that determine whether that specific subcategory is refundable to the employer or not. Maybe you do not allow alcoholic drinks to be refunded or purchased with company money, so you're going to reimburse food, you're going to reimburse soft drinks, but you're not going to reimburse tips or alcohol. So when the receipt comes through and it's being itemized, AI can detect whether that is a reimbursable or refundable expense or not. Finally, you can have Business Central enforce the management rules, display anti-corruption approvals, and then require specific expense reporting like the merchant name or the receipt number. You can also set up reminders. So who is going to send out reminder emails and how often are those reminder emails being sent out to your expense employees? Set up your mileage expense. What's your default mileage rate? And then also, if you are an organization that utilizes projects, this is actually a newer feature that was added, is you can add this to project tracking. So if you want to be able to track your expenses towards a specific project in Business Central to have more accurate cost, this will give you the ability to associate an expense to a project. You also have the ability to bill expenses back to a customer in the form of a posted sales invoice as well. And then per diem, you can calculate your per diem calculations here. What's your per diem calculation? Is it on a rolling period, full calendar day? What are the minimum number of hours that you need to work in order to get per diem? And then a flat 30, and then your rules, whether you're going to reduce per diem for a partial day of work, or if you're going to reduce per diem based on whether breakfast, lunch, or dinner was provided to the organization. And that is it. Once you're done, you can turn it off. You can enable the agent, and then you're good to go. From here, I want to go ahead and go over. I want to review the expense module a little bit before we dive into actually submitting expenses, because I want to show you sort of how the manual expense management piece works. I'm going to start by looking at the expense agent setups. Expense agent setup page is basically the page that houses all of the information that was done during the agent setup walkthrough that I had just shown you. So all the settings, once you apply them, are now housed here on the expense agent setup page. And this is where you can go ahead and modify any of those expense settings if they've changed at all. But as you can see, it's where you got your number series, your approvers, your allowances, and who actually controls the agent, who in your organization from a human oversight perspective can configure or work on behalf of the agent, okay? This is where you would set up your expense posting groups. So for each one of your expenses, you would then set up your prepayment credit accounts, your debit accounts, your non-refundable accounts, your rounding accounts, etc. So when the expenses post, they post to the correct GL entries. And then your expense categories. This is where you can go ahead and manage your expense categories. And I want to take a look quickly at some of the settings behind some of the expense categories, just so you can get an idea of what guidelines you can put around them. So for instance, if I want to look at entertainment, you'll see that this is an expense. This expense has some categories of alcohol, participants, guests, taxes, tips. It indicates whether it's going to be refundable or not, whether it's inactive. If it's inactive, an employee will not be able to submit it on their expense report. And then it also dictates whether a description is mandatory or not. But I can also apply some rules. So attachment enforcement, if I want to force an attachment or a receipt attachment to this specific expense that's categorized this way, I can either flag it with a warning like, hey, just warning you, you need to attach a receipt to this. It will allow the transaction to still go through, but it just displays a warning. Errors will not allow an expense to be submitted unless the enforcement goes through. So you can determine the attachment of enforcement there. Default payment method, you can determine how employees typically pay for this particular expense, what the expense group is, whether it's inactive, if they prepay for this expense or not, if it's refundable, and what the reimbursement type is. And then also you can determine the type of detail that's required for this expense too. You can have none. You can require it to be itemized. You can require participants. it will hit against this expense will hit against your per diem calculation, or you're required to put mileage on this particular expense. So as you can see for the entertainment piece, my organization requires that the participants are listed, and I'll go ahead and show you, how that gets applied. The other part that I want to go ahead and review is the rules. Okay, so let's see, let me go to expense management rules. So these are the rules that are assigned to a specific expense category and puts limits and guardrails around a specific expense for an employee. So for instance, I'm going to take a look at gifts. For my gifts, I can limit it to a expense location, so it can only be for a specific country. I can require justification if it's against a particular condition. I could require only a specific merchant. So if I can only buy gifts from Amazon, I can put Amazon there, and Amazon will be the only one allowed during the AI validation. Or I can put other rule conditions, whether it be a fixed amount, a max amount, a minimum amount. You need to at least justify your spend if it's over a specific amount, or you only get a certain amount every day. So like for instance, gifts here, I don't require any justification in my organization, but they're not allowed to spend more than $50 on a gift. And if it goes over that $50, the expense will be flagged as non-compliant, and they will not be allowed to submit. Per diem, same setup, similar to the same way. So per diem, they get $50 a day for per diem for their domestic locations. But as you can see here, we all know that, expenses are different, whether you go from, I'm in Chicago right now. If I go to New York City, the cost of living out there is a lot higher than in Chicago. Or if I'm going out to, going to Texas or another state in the United States or another country altogether, the cost of living is a bit higher. So I may want to have different per diem rates depending on where I am spending the money in. So you can set that up right here within Business Central that, okay, and when I go to, when I'm traveling domestic, I just have a $50 rate. Or if I'm going into France, let's see if it's set up, it's $110. But it's set up in a currency code of euro. But if I can also set up as if I'm traveling to a different state. So if I want to spend, for Chicago, I can spend $50 per day in Chicago. Or if I'm going to New York, I may be spending $75 a day. It just depends on, your company's policies. But it is, the expense management rules are pretty flexible, and the AI agent is really good at picking those up. Okay, I think that's a good start. Oh, expense users. That's the last thing that I want to go over really quickly. So your expense users are tied to employees within Business Central. So your employee, here are your employees. You can do it one of two ways. You can import all of your users as expense users and then use a utility to create all the employees in Business Central, or you can import all of the employees into the expense user section. But the point is you do need to have one employee set up for every expense user, because that is how it's tied to the employee ledger entries. As you can see here under John, my sales manager, I'm utilizing the expense management agent, or the expense agent, to calculate John's expenses, and they're all tied to the employee ledger entry. And that's how you ultimately do reimbursements to John. As you can see with John, I owe him $525. So when I'm actually doing payment journals, I can actually calculate my reimbursements using standard Business Central functionality. So if I go to my payment journal, I can go ahead and do prepare, and I can hit suggest employee payments. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus just on John here. Click OK. Whoop. Do this again. you'll see that John has 2 reimbursements here that I'm going to go ahead and pay him out, one for $225 and one for $300. So, and I, then I can follow by, paying him via ACH, paying him via check or etc. So I'm using standard payment journals at that point to reimburse my employees. So that's the main reason why those two need to be tied together. So let's now, I'm going to dive right back over to, now we're going to look at expenses and expense reports. So let's start with expenses. Everything starts with an expense in Business Central. There's the expense list here. Here is a list of all the expenses as they have come into Business Central. Okay, this is as if I'm managing them manually, not utilizing the expense agent. Okay, the expenses are what you do is you categorize them. You enter all your data. You can attach receipts to the specific expense. You can assign dimensions to the expense as well if you need to. You can set the billable check mark where you can actually bill the expense back to a specific customer, or you can bill the expense to an actual project within Business Central as well. Okay, so that's the first step, is actually creating the expense. Okay. It does do rule validation. So if you break one of the rules within Business Central that is set up. So let's create an expense here and let's see if I can mimic a rule breaking. I'm going to do a gift here. Let's do GP gift. We'll do gifts. As you can tell, it's breaking a rule right now. The merchant name is mandatory. So if I attempt to release this, it's going to let me release it, isn't it? If I attempt to create or to assign this to expense report, it's going to go ahead and fail. And I'm going to go ahead and put a merchant there, but I'm also going to put an amount of $75 here. Let's see. I don't know why it's not working, but in reality, a gift, because I have the rule assigned to the gift, it should actually come up with a rule violation saying, hey, you're over that $50 mark for gifts, so you need to be able to you need to fix that. The next step in creating an expense, or in managing your expenses, is adding them to an expense report, which will then go through an approval process. So if I go ahead and I can create the expense report directly from the expense card here, I can add it to an existing report, or I can create a brand new report. In this case, I'll create a brand new report. It's going to go ahead and open it. And the expenses, as I select them, are added to this expense report. I can even get more expenses from the expense page directly from within the expense report, so I can go the opposite way as well. And then from here, once it's done, I can go ahead and release it, and I can go ahead and post the expense report. Okay, that's how you would manage it out of Business Central. Now let's get into the cool stuff. Let's go ahead and attempt to manage an expense utilizing the client. So first, let me jump back into my slides here really fast. And the main end-to-end process of using the agent is fairly simple. So starting with capturing the receipt. Okay, the receipt is either uploaded or mileage is entered via the web app, which I'll show you, a mobile app, which is in the process of being released. It's not out yet. Or you can send an email to a general email account. As I demonstrated before, I have an expense at Gino Pack email address that I can send a receipt to. And if the agent recognizes that, hey, Gino's an employee, it's going to go ahead and create an expense for that employee. The agent will then extract the data. In order to create the expense, it will attempt to classify, categorize, and itemize the expense, and apply any rules that flag the expense. So you can handle those exceptions before submitting. You then, as a human, will just review the drafted expense records. You'll group them into different reports and then send them off to approval. And then finally, once they're approved, whoever manages the expenses within your organization can then post them and reimburse via journals if necessary. So that's the basic end-to-end process of managing an expense via the expense agent. So let's now show you, how easy that is out of Business Central. So we're using the expense agent. So I have the expense agent web app open here. Okay. And I have a couple of expenses that I have already processed here. But before I go ahead and go through these, what I'm going to do is I have a receipt here. Let's see. I have a receipt here for meals. Okay, so here's my meals receipt. I took a trip to Ohio, and I have this meal receipt from Chili's. So what I want to do is, instead of manually entering everything, I'm going to attach the receipt right here into the web client, and it's going to go ahead and process it. While it's doing that, I'm looking at my current expenses that I have already attached and already processed using the agent. And some of them are compliant, so I can go ahead and take a look here at my Hyatt hotel receipt here. You can see that the agent pulled in the expense amount, the date. It wrote a description for me. It demonstrated how I paid. It categorized it correctly via hotels. I didn't visit a client or anything like that, or part of a project, so I just went ahead and left those blank. But it itemized the entire receipt for me. The agent took in all of the lines on the receipt and indicated, okay, what was the subcategory? Was it the room? Was it tax? Was it parking, etc.? This is ultimately what the expense looks like when it comes through for an itemization expense. The escape room. This was another team building event that I did with my team while I was out in Ohio, and it flagged it as non-compliant. And the reason why is because the rule for morale is that participants are required for this expense. So I still have something I need to do to address in order to make this expense compliant. So I'll go under my participants. It's already added the tab here for me because it's required as part of this expense. I can go ahead and add myself, but I can also add employees within my organization. So these are all the employees that are part of the employee list. So I can go ahead and add, I can add, Gino Pack to this. I can add Jim. I can add Otis, and then I can even add external participants as well. So I can add, Josh joined me as well from BCS. And then I can go ahead and save changes. This receipt is going to go ahead and get reprocessed here, and you'll see that it is now compliant with my expense reporting needs. Okay. The last one is Chili's. Here's the Chili's expense that I had processed, that AI had processed and pulled in. I'm going to go ahead and jump over here into the Chili's receipt. Okay. This one is another rule. It categorized it as meals, which is correct. And the meals require participants. That's the way the expense was set up in Business Central. So it's going to go ahead and add, I'm going to go ahead and add participants. This was just me eating. I was heading back to the airport. So I went ahead and just got a meal for myself there. And I'll go ahead and hit save changes. And it'll process the receipt. It'll make it compliant. And now this entire expense report should be compliant. And now I am able to submit this expense report. Keep an eye on the number here. It's expense report 31. I'm going to go ahead and submit it. This is now going to go ahead and send the expense report for approval. Okay, but first I'll go ahead and jump into Business Central really quickly so you can see the status of the expense report, because remember, the data still is all managed directly out of Business Central. So I have expense report 31 here. If I click it, here is my flights, the escape room event, Hyatt Place, and the Chili's Bar and Grill meal, along with the listed expenses, as well as the attachments by line. So I can have all the receipts directly attached to the expense within Business Central. So when I post this, those attachment receipts will always be there. Okay. So with that, let's take a look at what the approval process looks like. So I'm John's manager, and John has submitted an expense for my approval. Here's the expense that just came through. I can do it all from the web portal here. No issues with that at all. I'll go ahead and dive through this really fast. I'll take a look. While I'm doing that, let's pretend really quickly, just so I can show this off a little bit, is what does it look like when you actually send an email? Let's pop back over to this one really quickly. This one is the one I want to be in. You can see that there are email notifications that get out as well. But let me go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to submit an expenses. Yeah, receipt spelled wrong. Okay, let's go ahead and submit a expense for fuel. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and send this in really quick. While I'm doing that, we'll pop back over to Business Central here really fast, or to my approval really fast. And I'm going to take a look at the expenses that John submitted here. Everything looks good. If I click on it, I can go ahead and look at it if I wanted to, along with the attachment as the approver. I can send it back to John if there are any issues with any of the expenses that I want to go ahead and send back, or I can go ahead and just approve it. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and approve the expense, send it out. Expense was approved. If I go back to Business Central now and I look at my expense reports, you'll see that this was approved. I can now go ahead and post this expense report, and it's now a posted expense with the receipt attached, all the different expenses completed. It sends reimbursement notifications for the expenses that are going to be reimbursed to the actual employee. You can elect to have a notification go out to the employee saying that the expense was going to be reimbursed. You can see on the employee side now, I'll get notified that the expense report has been approved, or I'll get notified that the expense report needs my review because maybe there is I'll get a notification that expense report needs to be reviewed. This is going to Gino. So it's pretty cool that how the expense management or expense agent in Business Central sort of handles all of those mundane tasks of submitting expenses for you. That email that I just sent myself, as you can see here, the agent pulled that in and it created a expense for me right here. This is the email that I sent. So this is the example of, okay, I'm on the road. I just took a quick picture of the receipt. I sent it via email into the expense management email account. The agent picked it up, recognized that it was from John Smith, tied it to him as an expense, and now it is in his portal, ready for him to review it and submit it. Okay. Super, super easy. I can go ahead and easily, let's say that I want to make a change. Let's say I just paid with this via cash. Okay. You'll see here now some of the changes, like there's going to be some reimbursement for this as well once it comes through. Yeah, see there's a reimbursable amount of $41.77 that I'll eventually get back for this expense. If I wanted to, I can just go ahead and submit it and then pop back over to Gino and let's go back to Gino as manager. And here's another expense report for my approval to review. And I can just approve it. It'll go into Business Central and be approved. So it's really like that expense, like I was managing approvals and expenses for one person. So it's for two people and just the amount of time that I was showing this to you. So it's really cool what Business Central can do with the expense agent out of the box. Some improvements that Microsoft is doing with this is there is a mobile app coming out as well. So you can actually download a mobile app onto your phone, which can access your camera to be able to take pictures of expenses on the fly and have them automatically be created as expenses. Also gives you the ability to do approvals, etc. All directly out of the expense agent. So super, super cool. Let me pop back into my slides here really fast. See where we're at next. Josh, are there any questions so far from the group?
Yeah, just there's one that came in that I think
Okay.
you might have already answered, but might as well read it
Okay.
off. Currently, we have one person review all expense reports, and then after review, they are sent for approval. Is that possible with this? So one person review all expense reports.
Mm,
After that review,
yeah.
they are sent for approval.
Not that so with the agent, probably not. That one I'll get back to you on and check. I'll get back to you on that one. We can follow up with them. I don't believe so. You can assign one approver to one team, but there is the functionality of expense of teams. So let me show you this in Business Central really quickly because I think we do have the time. Yeah, it's only 2:10. So let me show you this concept within Business Central. It doesn't necessarily have the ability for the manager to submit them for approval, but it gives you sort of a manager's view of the expenses of your team. So there is this concept of, so let me go to the expense teams here. What you can do is create expense teams, and every team can have a manager. Okay. And that manager can then review all the expenses that are part of their team via what's called the, I forgot the page name. What's it called? Where is it? Oh, manager expense reports. So this will actually allow you to look at all of the expenses that were attached to the team that you are managing. So while there's not the ability from here for you to actually go and submit the expense for approval, a manager can still go in and review the expenses for the team that they're managing, and communicate some way that those expenses are ready to submit. So that's kind of how it is out of the box right now. Any other
Awesome.
questions, Josh?
Yeah. So another one that came in, if I wanted to start using the expense agent, what is the best way or recommended way to roll it out? Would you start with one person or department, or would you enable it more broadly?
That's a good question. So I think with that, it depends on whether you have an expense management solution already or not. If you don't have an expense management solution in your environment right now, this is in Business Central. It's already available to you. You don't have to, and if you have an essential Business Central license, it's included. You don't even need the premium Business Central license to get the expense management module or the expense agent. And I'll get into licensing here in a second. But if you're not using it, yes, there's no reason why you can't try a piloted expense management project with a specific department. And I would do a department that would most utilize it. So in my mind, sales. Choose a couple of salespeople that are doing manual expense reports right now. Turn on the agent within Business Central and start using it. You can also use it in your sandbox as well. So you can test to see how AI is processing those receipts. Utilize the default setups that Microsoft gives you out of the box and then refine them. Don't try and set up the entire module from scratch on your own because there's bits and pieces of it that you may miss. So if you're already using an expense management solution, I think the big thing that you'll want to quantify is the cost of utilizing the agent equate to or it save you significant dollars and time compared to the expense management solution you're using today. And that may require a conversation So for those particular situations where you want to say, hey, does it financially make sense for me to switch to the out-of-the-box Business Central agent? Reach out to Josh, reach out to myself. We would be happy to have a conversation with you to sort of talk through what your expense management requirements are, so we can recommend the appropriate solution.
Awesome. And then lastly, which is really kind of an extension of that question, I guess, or I guess kind of restating it. Um, but from your perspective, is there a good rule of thumb for deciding when Business Central is enough and when you might want to be extending beyond it?
Complexity, think of a complexity scenario,
Mm.
like the expense agent assigns one approver to one user, so if you have very complex approval hierarchies that require you to, like, let's say I have I made a purchase, and the purchase is, of this dollar amount. And
Mhm.
if it's above this dollar amount, it has to go to this person, so if you have really complex approval hierarchies, depending on dollar amount or category even, it's maybe look at another solution, but this is a growing solution. It's still in public preview. So it's still, Microsoft is still adding functionality and expanding upon it. So there's a chance that they can add those more complex approval processes. So I think it just starts with think of the complexity of your expense management process, and then we can see if there's any major gaps in using the out of the box solution.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, I think that looking through it probably wraps it up for
Awesome.
any questions that came in.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap things up here with walking through what the licensing requirements are. And this is probably like the one thing that shocked me the most about this new module is that Microsoft is truly investing in it and making it appropriate for businesses to be able to utilize it. So let's take a look. So what I did is I put some scenarios on who would be using the expense agent and what license you would be required to have. Because the last thing you want is to buy your 300-person organization. You don't want to buy 300 Business Central licenses. It doesn't make sense, especially for somebody who's just submitting expenses. So in the first scenario, if you're submitting expenses outside of the Business Central environment, you do not require a Business Central license. So if you want all of your sales team members who don't have access to your ERP system to submit expenses, they're not required to have a Business Central license. The cost for that comes behind with the Copilot credits. So the Copilot credits is actually the AI currency that is processing those receipts and attaching them. If you manage expenses and submit expense reports within Business Central, you're required to have a team license as a minimum. So managing and submitting, at a minimum, you need a team license. If you're approving expense reports, at a minimum, you need a team license. Now, if you're posting reports and processing payments, so if you're doing the actual accounts payable side of the transaction, you will be required to have a full Business Central license. So submitting, no license; reviewing, managing, approving, team license; posting and paying out, full license. So pretty easy to understand. One question that may pop up is, okay, well, how do I know what Copilot credits are costing me? Well, everyone's trying to everyone's trying to figure that out, to be honest. But Microsoft does give you the tools within the system to help you understand what your costs are when it comes to seeing uh, uh, what your expense agent credits are costing you. So I'm going to go to the expense. There's a page here in Business Central. Let me find it, called the Expense Agent Billing Overview. What this does is that gives you an idea of what AI is charging you to process a receipt or an expense within Business Central. So you'll actually see the number of Copilot credits that were consumed for one expense. Okay. Now I can't put a dollar amount behind this. We can help you calculate that. So on average, it's about 50 Copilot credits. Microsoft sells Copilot credits in bulk at a discount if you want to buy Copilot credits in bulk, or you can do pay as you go, where Microsoft will just bill you based on consumption of credits. Okay. If you want to dive in and get an analysis of, hey, we process, 200 receipts, per month. How much do you think it's going to cost us to utilize the expense agent? Reach out to Josh, reach out to myself. We'll be happy to help you with that analysis. So you can actually do a, cost of ownership comparison between your current expense management solution or the Business Central expense agent. But this tool is available for you within Business Central, so you can see how much Copilot credits you're consuming by processing expenses within Business Central. Alrighty. With that, I'm gonna. Any other questions, Josh?
No, I think that's all the questions that came in for now.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna toss it back over to you now and to kind of wrap us up.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much, Gino. Ton of great information there. We've already hit the questions, so really that's all we had for our presentation today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If anything you saw today sparked an idea, or you want to have more of a conversation around AI versus automation and kind of where this could fit in with your organization, we'd love to sit down with you and do a review and kind of talk through where that might fit, or even kind of what we're seeing as far as best practices. My contact information is right here on the screen, so feel free to reach out. We'll also reach out to you, the participants on this call after this. Along with that, if you'd like to meet us in person, the BCS team will be at Community Summit North America in Nashville this October. We'd love to connect with you there. We also have quite a bit of content on our website that are on demand, so you can always go ahead and access past videos there. And with that, really just want to say thank you all again for spending time with us today. Thank you, Gino, and we hope to see everyone at our next session.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Awesome.